2013 in Doha, Qatar, and is now the vice chair of the UNFCCC subsidiary body for implementation, this means of the Climate Change Convention. He is the special envoy and climate change ambassador for St. Kitts and Nevis, and he has chaired the Alliance of Small Island States. He is also a high-level advisor for the United Nations and the African Union Joint Mission in Darfur. I could go on and on and on. I stop here and would invite Ambassador van Lierop for his keynote speech to us here in the room, and I understand he would be happy to have some discussion after his speech with all of you, respond to questions and answers. So, Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. I've learned so much today that I feel that pretty soon I should get a bill for tuition from the bursar, because it's been very, very enlightening to me, and I express my appreciation to all of you. Today, I have the honor of addressing you in my personal capacity. I do not speak for the SBI or for the UNFCCC. I do not speak as an ambassador or even as an attorney. I speak personally today. Every word comes from the depth of my heart. With gratitude for what all of you do and for why you are here today. Dr. Schaefer-Cruz, I am pleased to join in congratulating you on your assumption of the chair of this important body and on presiding over the network meeting and consulting partners meeting for 2013. As this is the International Year of Water Cooperation, you have assumed the chair at a most opportune time for all of us to benefit from your skills, your long experience in development policy, and your very obvious leadership abilities. I also applaud our tireless friend and colleague, Dr. Anya Grobicki, Executive Secretary of the Global Water Partnership, and her very, very effective team, as well as Dr. Mohammed Ait Kaidi, Chair of the GWP Technical Committee, and Katharina Salin Tegnander, who today I was very pleased to hear abolish the use of the A word. Hopefully, austerity will be a thing of the past. All have our appreciation for the way they carry the torch on this important issue. For as we well know, water is life. This morning, I listened with great interest to the enlightening words of Mr. Kenzo Hiroki. I am now grateful to be allowed to follow in the distinguished footsteps of Dr. Ismail Sarageldin, founding chair of the GWP, the Prince of Orange, and Mrs. Margaret Catley Carlson, all of whom delivered lectures that stimulated and provoked innovative thinking on global water issues. Dear friends and colleagues, in the human experience, every generation faces its own moral dilemmas, policy quandaries, and defining moments of truth. Are we today at such point in history? I believe we are. Henry David Thoreau, the renowned 19th century humanist, philosopher, writer, poet, naturalist, and highly principled proponent of civil disobedience in the face of government that does not stand on the side of justice, was imprisoned shortly before the American Civil War for his steadfast refusal to pay taxes to a government that recognized slavery as legal. While in prison, Thoreau was visited by his very close friend and fellow writer, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who upon seeing his friend behind bars, exclaimed to him, "Henry David, what are you doing in there?" To which Thoreau looked at his friend from behind the bars and calmly replied, "Ralph Waldo, what are you doing out there? Thoreau's question to Emerson could just as easily be asked today to those who question the science of climate change, erect obstacles to efforts to adapt to climate change, and do not yet understand the urgency of global water security. In its long evolution, humankind has faced many moral imperatives and defining moments at various stages of its history. The moral dilemma of what to do about slavery and the slave trade was in its time one of the most troubling. Colonialism, which was basically another form of people, or what are now nations, being owned by others, was simply a cloak of slavery in another guise. Genocide, gender inequality, violence against women and children also present moral and social dilemmas for societies throughout the world. The indifference of some to the scarcity of drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene for hundreds of millions of people across the globe is also a moral dilemma of significant magnitude that Thoreau would have recognized, confronted, and made one of today's defining moments. I have no doubt that the abolitionists of the 19th century would be here, seated with us, exchanging ideas and strategies to help bring about a world where access to water and water security are universally recognized as fundamental human rights for all, regardless of their incomes, regardless of their gender, regardless of their country of origin or current residence, and regardless of their perceived social status. They would certainly join us in acknowledging that water is life, and there is no necessity for nearly 800 million people to live without clean and safe water for their daily consumption. Some may find it harsh and disturbing to equate the moral dilemmas of Thoreau's time with the moral dilemma of today posed by a lack of water security for so many hundreds of millions of people. Let those who find those words harsh and disturbing try to explain why to a woman or young girl in Darfur, left vulnerable, physically abused, and violated when she went in search of water for her family. Let them try to explain to those who live without water for even rudimentary sanitation. Let them try to explain to parents who tearfully bury their children after they die from dysentery and other easily preventable diseases. Which is harsher or more disturbing? My words today, or the everyday realities of water insecurity faced by almost 1 billion people? Barely 10 days ago, I had the honor of joining a small number of United Nations ambassadors from developing countries in attending a special session on water and disaster cooperation at the high-level International Conference on Water Cooperation in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. In a concept note for that session, it was most appropriately observed that, and I quote, "Water is life, but water can also be a threat to life." During the past decade, water-related disasters have not only struck more frequently, but have also been more severe, hampering sustainable development by causing political, social, and economic shocks in many countries. Over 90% of disasters in the world are water-related in terms of numbers of people affected. Those disasters do not respect boundaries, income, or gender. They do not care what religion their victims may observe, what the color of their skin, or even the color of their hair might be. Water disasters may take years to develop, or they may strike suddenly and ferociously without warning, sweeping away all within their path. Not a single nation in the world can claim immunity from water disasters. Not a single nation, town, or village should be indifferent to the causes or consequences of water disasters. This is a global problem that requires a unified global response. Those who think their wealth will protect them are living a fantasy. Poor people and less developed nations are certainly more vulnerable, but their vulnerability awaits all people who live on this planet. The balance of life is very delicate and finely tuned. One catastrophic event could conceivably propel us all into the great unknown. It could be the melting of the Arctic Circle. It could be the melting of the glaciers in the Andes, the Himalayas, or the Alps. It could be the melting of permafrost. Who among us is prepared to roll the dice and gamble on the future of life on this planet? The ambassadors and other officials who were with us in Dushanbe were in unanimous agreement that it is long overdue, and we, the international community, raise our voices in unison and bring to life the promises that had been made but not yet realized. Some of us are even wondering if a comprehensive international agreement on water would be appropriate, and if appropriate, also practical. International water cooperation is essential. Last year, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the political declaration adopted by the heads of state and government at Rio+20 recognized water as central to sustainable development. The leaders committed themselves and their countries to, and I quote, the progressive realization of access to safe and affordable drinking water and basic sanitation for all as necessary for poverty eradication, women's empowerment, and to protect human health, and to significantly improve the implementation of integrated water resource management at all levels as appropriate. The President-elect of the 68th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Ambassador John Ash, who many of you know from his long and distinguished career in working on these issues, has selected as the theme of his presidency the post-2015 development agenda, setting the stage. To further this theme, he has identified a number of thematic debates which will occur in the course of the General Assembly. In less than 1 month, the special debate on water, sanitation, and sustainable energy in the post-2015 development agenda will be held. World Water Week is one of the events helping to propel the necessary momentum on this subject. The 2013 Budapest Water Summit is another. The questions we will be grappling with at these various meetings are already known to you. They include how international cooperation can significantly reduce water pollution and improve water quality. How can we significantly improve wastewater treatment? What measures are needed to respond to floods, droughts, and water scarcity? How can we integrate and enhance a gender perspective in water issues? How can we improve transboundary integrated water resource management? What practical measures can be implemented to sustainable water practices in agriculture and food security? The urgency and importance of international cooperation on water issues were illustrated by the words of Professor and Dean of Law Alexandra DiPolito Dunn, who said earlier this year at the World Justice Forum that, and I quote, "the flow of water does not observe modern political boundaries." Professor Anders Jagerskog, Director of Knowledge Services, Stockholm International Water Institute, at the same meeting, noted the prevalence of governance issues surrounding transboundary waters with his observation on the almost 300 shared rivers and also more than 300 shared aquifers and many shared lakes around the world. He made a very, very pointed observation that sharing is not difficult as long as there is abundant water. It is the scarcity of water that causes and exacerbates conflict. From my own experience, Darfur is a dramatic example. The Middle East is the scene of many conflicts that are more rooted in contradictions over water more than over oil. The Nile River, a source of life for many, is also a potential source of growing social and political contradictions. We can expect to see an increase of such conflicts unless we substantially improve on and increase the level of international cooperation on water. In order to do this, governments must avoid corruption and not rush to blindly embrace the privatization of water resources and assure that the poor have access to water. Governments might also wish to look to the numerous transboundary water agreements that do work, the ones that promote sustainable economic development and the sharing of the finite water resources so vital to the survival of their respective countries. We might all be wise to remember that no nation can go it alone in facing the challenges and vulnerabilities of today's world. Adaptation to the adverse consequences of human-induced climate change compels us to seek ways we can cooperate and help each other. In multilateral negotiations, such as those of the UNFCCC, we do not always accentuate common challenges and vulnerabilities we face. Generally speaking, we do a decent job of recognizing those commonalities, but at certain critical moments, narrower economic interests often intrude. These are not always national economic interests, for as we know, the economic interests with the greatest impact are no longer confined within any one nation or group of nations. These economic interests know no boundaries and accept no limits on their ability to influence the dynamic of humankind's future. In some instances, this may be a good thing. In other instances, however, it is not. An astute observer once remarked, and I quote, that man's mad vanity is often mocked by life. Thus, while some race recklessly to build, deploy, and even use newer and more powerful weapons of mass destruction, nature demonstrates with increasing and repeated regularity that it can outdo mankind by increasing hurricanes, cyclones, earthquakes, floods, drought, and other catastrophes that give us more than enough death and devastation, if that is what we want. Similarly, we have the phenomenon of those who continue to build luxury homes on beaches and other waterfronts, sometimes even on the edges of precarious cliffs with spectacular views, because they choose to do so, not because their economic conditions force them to do so. Often government and insurance are called upon to rescue the owners of those structures, which leaves fewer resources to rescue others who are in dire need of help. Building temples of excess and engaging in unsustainable development defies logic, and what we know with certainty is bound to occur. Humankind sometimes seems to welcome challenging the strength of nature, sometimes even daring nature to unleash its fury. From its inception, the Global Water Partnership has been well grounded in local and regional experiences addressing the various crises in water security and water disasters. Its vision and strong voice in advancing the cause of integrated water resources management represents what is needed for mankind to adapt to survive. The world is changing rapidly, so rapidly that the pages of history can barely be written before they must be amended. Never before have affected populations had such an opportunity to work with others to help build water security. No one can dispute that water is a public good with its own social and economic value. As a very strong advocate for integrated water resources management, the GWP is helping to implement the commitments set out in the Rio+20 Declaration. Those many of us believe are a part of the broader implications of the climate change negotiations. It has taken too long for us to get to this stage, but the GWP network of partnerships has turned away from doom-laden scenarios of inevitability to instead embrace policies and actions that underscore the connectivity of the multiple dimensions of water security and offer hope and enthusiasm for countries where previously there was very little hope. There is much more that can be said, more examples of what we have done in the past that is not wise, and more examples of what we are doing today that is wiser. Our time today is short, however, and it is better for us to dialogue than it would be for me to recite things that you know as well, if not better than I. Let me close by expressing the wish that as the United Nations climate change negotiations move forward, and I hope that is not an expression of wishful thinking on my part, more delegations will see the need for functional synergy on biodiversity, desertification, various agreements on water and energy, and the UNFCCC negotiations. Hopefully, water and energy will play more prominent roles in the negotiations, particularly when it comes to adaptation and implementation of what we have already agreed to. Mitigation may at this stage be a more difficult task. It is still vital, but we must accelerate our efforts on adaptation. Far too many people are already in imminent danger for us to falter on adaptation. We can achieve a great deal if we work together in this respect. We can achieve nothing if any of us think they can be winners and others can be losers. This is a moment of truth for us. We either face the future together or none of us have a future at all. Thank you.
Lierop, thanks a lot for this very inspiring and thoughtful speech. I would like to invite you to respond to a few comments and questions from the auditorium. I see a gentleman over there, please.
Thank you very much for very excited observation and your personal view on this problem. My name is Vadim Sokolov, I'm from Central Asia, and I would like to ask you the question which I asked a previous lecturer. First time I asked this question Mr. Serageljan, second time Margaret Carlson, and it's interesting your personal opinion about the issue. The issue is the following. There is example of legal instrument which humanity using everywhere. So this is road, rules of road or traffic rules. So if you would like to drive car, you should follow proper, acceptable by everywhere rules of road, and you should pass examination. So what do you think if under umbrella of United Nations there will be elaborated basic principles of water management and water use? So, and if you would like to be a governmental official or elected in position of NGO, or you would like to be governor of city or province, you should pass examination about knowledge of these basic rules of water management and use. Just to make your life more easy, I would like to say that what was the answer from Mr. Serageljan? So he was very skeptical, and he told that unfortunately today we cannot rely on legal regulations. Maggie, she was more optimistic, but she also was that we should be implement such kind of global rules. You should not force to the people, so it should be. So my question to you, do you believe that such kind of global rules could change the behavior of the people?
If I understood your question correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong in my answer with respect to understanding your question, I believe that it's incumbent on people, local people, global people really, to get more actively engaged. Because if you look, for example, just for example, at the situation on human rights, I know not in history of a single government that ever voluntarily implemented a progressive change or law on human rights without pressure from its population. And if officials are not responding to this water crisis, I think that it would be up to the population to give them a grade at the polling place or otherwise. You know, a great deal of the Arab Spring was related to water issues and the failure of food and the high price of food as a result. And so people have a way of letting government know when they're doing the job or not doing the job. And that, I think, goes for all over the world. Now, sometimes it takes longer than other times to change government, I understand that. But that's something that is left to the people of each country with respect to its needs on water and water security.
I recognize the ambassador of the Netherlands.
Ambassador, thank you for your inspiring but also somewhat gloomy speech, and you're right to be in that mood. The question is, my question would be to you. You're right. It is an appalling situation, and it is visible to everybody. It's not just Darfur. It's in the eastern part of Germany. It's in Holland. It was in America. The storms everywhere in the world. You can see it on TV or physically see. So it really is a global issue. Now, when you talk about CO2, that's abstract for most people. Yes, it goes up, but how can you measure? But this is for everybody to see. Why is there not an upsurge, not a tsunami, as it were, of impatience or even indignation that this issue is not really on the top of the agenda?
Thank you, Ambassador. You're very right. There is a great deal of indifference when there should be a tsunami of public opinion demanding that governments take action. I hope that the world does not have to wait for situations such as the great tragedy that befell the Netherlands after the Second World War. No developed country in the world ever paid a higher price than the Netherlands did with the great floods that changed so much in the Netherlands. And I wish that other developed countries could take a lesson from the Netherlands. Maybe you need to conduct some seminars and courses for them to learn the lessons that you learned. But I concur with what you said. But I'm not so pessimistic because I've been here since yesterday and I've witnessed so much energy and so much dynamism. I'm going to take it back and share it with some of my colleagues. And hopefully when the Global Water Partnership comes to New York in a few weeks, some of my colleagues will be jumping up and down with excitement and glad to meet the chair and the executive director and whoever else comes from the GWP.
Thank you.
Please, Patricia.
My name is Pat Wouters from the GWP Tech. I cannot tell you how delighted I am to have an international lawyer giving the annual lecture. This is just fantastic. My question, Ambassador, is what do you consider the role of international law and the United Nations is in advancing transboundary water cooperation? I get that question all the time, so I'm going to take notes.
All right, thank you. Well, let me be a little bit critical of our profession. First of all, I think that nowadays, too many law firms think of law as a business rather than as a profession. And the tradition of public service suffers a great deal. One of the things that too many law firms want to know is how many billable hours can we get out of this? When the catastrophes that may hit us all, the amount of billable hours, the amount of money in our bank accounts won't matter at all. It's incumbent upon our profession, and I urge you to urge them. Don't just engage in civil disobedience against government, engage in civil disobedience against law firms also. And demand of them that they make available their resources, their experience, their expertise to help save this planet. Because after all, before any one of them became a lawyer, they were a human being. And that's what they must remember. Try to remember that. So I'm a great admirer of your work. And I hope that when you next come to North America, besides taking in a hockey game, we might also be able to get you to come to New York City, to the New York Bar Association, come to some of the universities and law schools. And I think there are plenty of people waiting to enlist in the water security effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I recognize the Ambassador of Indonesia.
Thank you, Ambassador von Lierop. Personally, I'm so happy to see you again. You don't know me, I'm sure, but I know you. I was serving my mission to UN back in early 90s. So your soft voice, your strong voice is always remember me when I went in New York long time ago. Thank you for seeing you again. Thank you for a very enlightening statement on lecture on this water. You were saying that the importance of not privatizing the water. So, in your opinion, that how this negotiation water will be? Because you mentioned that in some part of the world that water situation which is more important than oil, which is we know that some issues in that we are facing now internationally just based more on oil, at least from what we see in the media, rather than on water. So I agree with you that how big this issue will be, how important this issue will be, and the importance of not privatizing water. I'm speaking as Indonesian, I'm speaking as Balinese, which is under the UNESCO. We just got our traditional water irrigation system, which is, we don't know, just scientific progress, a prehistoric water system still exists and still being used. Then what do you think about this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you know what? I think I do remember you from the Indonesian mission. And let me share with you also that one of the reasons why I'm here today is because I was so very well protected by Indonesian police units in Darfur. And I thank you for that. As a matter of fact, the ones I can recall protected us very, very well. Rwanda, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and a few others I won't name. And one of the things that those units did, also at the request of Professor Ibrahim Gambari, who was the head of UNAMID, was to bring boring tools with them, in addition to their weapons. And in hotly contested areas, they bored water holes, and that helped to reduce a lot of the friction in the conflict there. Of course, Unfortunately, Professor Gambari was criticized by certain unnamed permanent members of the Security Council, but use your imaginations, because they wanted the UNAMID forces to confront the Sudanese army rather than, quote unquote, waste time building infrastructure that would be left behind. I'm not going to say any more than that on that subject, but I think that that's indicative of the attitude of people who don't recognize the importance of water in reducing conflicts. And thank you, Indonesia, for having done that and contributed to that effort. Now, with respect to negotiations, which is what you asked, right? I wish I had a silver bullet, but I don't. I think, as in the climate change negotiations, a great many people had to come together and really work hard. We negotiated that convention in a very short period of time. I would like to see, even if it takes a little bit longer, if enough countries, if enough experts feel that a global binding international agreement on water would be necessary, that we give that a lot of thought. There are people here in this room, one of them even asked a question shortly before you, who I think could be very, very useful in such a process, because they have a tremendous amount of knowledge. If countries have the political will to do it, the expertise exists. Right here in this room, we could move mountains on the subject of water security, if only governments will listen. It's fortunate that we have the ambassadors of the Netherlands and Indonesia here, because I know that they care enough and their governments care enough. And so we need to enlist others. We need to become the Pied Pipers or the Johnny Appleseeds of water security and spread the message throughout the globe. This message is just as important. This is a fundamental and basic human right, and we should not let anyone tell us otherwise.
Thank you very much. I recognize a lady over there, and then Mr. Skollis, and then Lierop, yes. Please.
Ambassador, we have reasons to cheer up before the report of the climate change that will be delivered in Stockholm at the end of this month, because of the agenda that President Obama presented on climate change. After all the catastrophes that have taken place in the United States, finally they realized that climate change is a reality. Don't you think that water should be more implemented in this agenda, and how do you advise us from GWP to push the agenda of Mr. Obama at the UN level? May I add to your list of ambassadors, we have His Excellency, the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia, among us here.
Yes.
If you can elaborate on this optimism, because I think there are, in the agenda that President Obama presented in June this year, there are many nice things for the UN. And all the work we have been trying to do so far will be now approved or even implemented on this new agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me acknowledge the presence of the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia and also congratulate him. I co-teach a course at Pace Law School, and this past semester one of our best students was a young woman from Saudi Arabia, and there were a couple of other people from Saudi Arabia who were at the law school. And I think that bodes very, very well, because they were brilliant students on this subject in climate change. Congratulations to the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia on that. And with respect to President Obama and US actions on climate change, I might be one of the last to express satisfaction with what has been done with respect to climate change policies in the United States. As you know, that's a very complicated political issue in the United States. Some people would rather keep their guns than ever acknowledge that climate change exists. Some people will be deniers of science, not only on climate change, but on so many other subjects until their very last breath. So it's up to us to try to convince them more. We must mobilize, 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 and organize, organize, organize. That is all that we can do. It's hard, tough work, but democracy never was intended to be easy. We've got to use friendly persuasion and try to convince people and show them the folly of their ways. I went through Hurricane Sandy last year and remember being without power for 2 weeks. And so many people were complaining, and I was thinking that those 2 weeks are nothing compared to what most people in the developing world faced. And for a little while, my neighbors and I were living as if we were living in a developing world. But even under those circumstances, even under those conditions, we were still far, far better off than most poor people in the rest of the world. Far better off. And that's what we've got to get people to realize.
Thanks for this. May I invite now the Secretary of Water Resources and Government of India for a short intervention.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I convey my apologies for missing bulk of the lecture because my position was like between the two banks of the river. I was there in the Congress, there was a meeting on the trans-border issues. Then I rushed over here, so I missed bulk of the lecture. But whatever little I could hear, I have one small question to His Excellency the Ambassador, not in his capacity as an ambassador, but in his capacity as an eminent international lawyer, jurist. So my question is that we were told that there is a UNEC Convention of 1992, and then there is a UN Water Convention. Certain regulations were framed, Berlin 2007 and Helsinki 1993. So why is it on the same subject, there are two parallel conventions? Now each convention says that both are complementary to each other. Why have two conventions? Why ask developing countries or bulk of the countries, and I believe there are 146 countries that have yet to exercise the choice between one convention and another. Can't the two conventions be merged into one if they are complementary? Thank you, sir.
That's a very, very good question, and I suppose it goes to the nature of the implementation of conventions. Water is a subject, and our colleague and professor can bear me out on this, but water happens to be an area in which there are so many conventions, but there doesn't yet appear to be a comprehensive global convention that addresses all of the problems of water. Maybe it's not possible to do that. I don't know. It may not be wise. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of time and resources to negotiate conventions. But some of the conventions address one subject, one area. Some of them have been ratified by some countries, not by others. And some countries, almost, it's like a supermarket. They sort of pick and choose what conventions in the field they want to acknowledge, let alone abide by. So it's a sort of sorry state of international law, I think, a little bit, and that we could improve on, but I don't know, maybe we can't improve on it as a practical matter. May I share that answer with Professor Wouters?
Thank you very much. I'm happy to speak to you in a bilateral sense, but there are two global instruments. The UN Watercourses Convention, which will soon enter into force, I would anticipate by December, with 35 countries, and the Helsinki Convention, the 1992 Helsinki Convention, has now been opened up for universal accession.
Yes.
And the Helsinki Convention really was inspired by the Economic Commission of Europe, and basically is a limiting transboundary impact, sort of a preventing pollution convention, so a more sophisticated. Each of the two conventions are complementary. I don't find them to be in conflict. So from my point of view, and we've addressed it in tech paper number 17 on transboundary waters there at the side. From my point of view, it depends on the needs of the country, but there would not be a conflict if India chose to ratify both of those conventions. The UN Watercourses Convention based mostly on allocation framework, general rule of equitable and reasonable use, and the other Helsinki Convention based on limiting transboundary impact. Both of them are valuable global instruments.
Do you think that the opening of the Helsinki Convention for accession by others is going to be a significant advance?
Yes, yes, both, and it depends on the region. And the UNEC has been very instrumental in promoting the UNEC Convention, especially in Central Asia. So both should be looked at. And in terms of a global instrument, I would urge instead that nations look at each of these two instruments and consider ratifying one or the other, or both. But there will be a technical focus paper coming from the GWP Tech on this specific issue.
Okay, good. I'm going to look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now would invite Mr. Skoros, then we have Mr. Lierop, and there was another gentleman down there, and I think then we might close the round here.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your inspiring lecture, which is deeply ethical. It approaches the issue on ethical grounds. And the adaptation issue at the moment is really, to a large extent, an ethical issue. And I think here there are reasons to be optimistic and pessimistic. When you come to the individuals adapt every day, but not always in favor of the environment. In Greece, we have increased the number of air conditioners in the last few years, going just opposite to what is required from the energy or water actually demands. And this is natural. I mean, we may explain to people, but this is very much towards, parallel to the tragedy of commons. So adaptation, as we have to address it today, is a public issue. And my question to you is, we are talking about security. Water security is part of the international security, and you raised that. We have the security in the UN system, Council. I wonder, is there any chance that we have a Security Council for the environment, for water, and all what is really above the armaments? I know that it sounds very ethical and idealistic, but is there any chance that otherwise I don't see really through the negotiations of bilateral or trilateral character any solution? This is why many of us here try to see what in parallel of what we are doing as individuals, as regional partnerships, as council partnerships, as country partnerships can do. We are doing our best convincing people, educating students, but this is not enough. And the reality today is that the ambassadors at your level, at the highest level, despite the very generous commitments that we hear from various leaders have not reached a level of agreement similar to the ones we have for other kinds of security.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Also a tough question, because the Security Council has not taken up the question of climate change when it has been requested to do so as a security issue with respect to the continued existence of certain countries. The Council has not done that. And one of the reasons is because the Council is still grounded in the post-World War II thinking with respect to security. And the veto system is a system that would not be acceptable today, I think, to most countries that are members of the United Nations, but it was acceptable then. So I don't know what the answer is. I doubt that we will see a water security council, if you will. I think that just getting water on the agenda is difficult enough, as Dr. Grobicki can tell you. She's been pushing for a long time at the UNFCCC and at the UN General Assembly. We're getting closer, but I don't think that they are yet prepared to consider it a Security Council issue. Unfortunately, it's probably going to have to take some major catastrophe before that happens. And I hope it's not too late when that happens. And I hope I'm not being pessimistic, but I just don't see a water security council.
Monsieur Diallo.
Thank you very much. I used to know you when you were much younger.
You still know me, I'm still very young.
But just to say how much I admire your being all along under duress, but still cool. And some of us who are coming from landlocked countries, when we heard you, we were thinking that you were just overdoing it. But now that we are being hit by the consequences of climate change, then we just wonder, why aren't you more forthcoming than you are doing at present? Because we just believe that it is hurting. And while big ones still wonder if there is climate change, or they call it climate variation, we know what it is. And for the last 10 or 15 years, the onus on meeting the consequences of climate change have been on our farmers and our livestock breeders. How long are we going to go on doing this? You are wise, you are a bit younger than I am, and I just wonder how long can one do this, because, I mean, you're not Kiribati, but it's almost, and the threats to those islands seem to be now more in evidence as time goes on. But I think that, is there a way for you to convince the international community that now is the time, and you don't have to have a dream? This could be, I mean, you could be just daydreaming that the time has come for us to move one step forward, because the more we wait, the more some of the most vulnerable are likely to be facing the music in a way they cannot afford.
I wish I could agree with you, but I think that the real decision makers in the biggest of the developed countries do know that climate change is real. I'm not sure that they care, though, because certain ignorance with respect to the subject is allowed to fill the airwaves and newspapers, and I think that they know that. But I also think that sometimes people can make cold and calculated decisions that it may or may not be in their particular economic interest to worry about that. They may be willing to gamble that they will survive the impact. I think that's a foolish gamble, because when things begin to unravel in the world, as I said earlier, I don't think anyone can predict where it's going to, and I don't think it will necessarily be that far down the pike. All it takes is one major incident to unravel life as we know it on the planet. I don't think the most brilliant scientist in the world knows what that will be. Like I said, it could be permafrost, it could be the Arctic Circle, it could be a glacier in Iceland, it could be a glacier in Tajikistan that somehow unleashes those forces. So all that we can do is be relentless. Just don't let them get away. Just dog them. And we must pursue the truth. They know, and I think in the climate change negotiations recently, it's become a little bit too technical. I think that we spend too much time now trying to prove the science. I think that really the climate change negotiations are political, and we should recognize that they are political. And there are other things that the largest developed country wants, and we should deny it, those things, until it's willing to acknowledge what we want, which is the survival of the planet. And until the climate change negotiations become part of a political process, I don't know how far we're going to get.
I recognize the gentleman over there, and then I should not forget the last speaker on the list is our Executive Director, Lierop.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I am the Saudi ambassador. Yes.
Shukran, Sayyid.
First, let me thank you for thought-provoking lecture. And although I must share with all honesty the sentiment of my colleague of Netherlands, that is very depressing and very gloomy picture that you draw about water security. It's unfortunate, but probably this is reality that we are living nowadays. And you mentioned, sir, that the indifference of some people about water security represent moral dilemma. How do you think we should promote it? Do you think that using social media will be effective to promote at least the two conventions that the professor near me spoke about? Thank you, sir.
I'm smiling because social media, I'm what's known as a dinosaur. And the keyboard is a little bit too small for the paws of a dinosaur. So I don't engage in social media at all. I'm embarrassed to say I'm a real throwback. But I'm not pessimistic because human beings have adapted before, and we already see evidence that vegetation and plant life, some trees, are adapting and requiring less water. And there are possibilities, there are things that human beings can still do. I think we are going to have consequences from climate change, but I'm still hopeful that it won't be. There was a film a few years back called Water World, I think. Yeah, with what's his name? Kevin Costner. Yes, right. I hope that we don't come to that, but I think that we still have time to put pressure on. Mitigation is a tougher issue, I think. But I think we still have time to put pressure on and raise the heat with respect to adaptation. And let me be very clear about this. I think that justice demands justice absolutely demands that the developed countries contribute significantly to adaptation measures for the developing world, because not only did the developing world not contribute to the problem, but throughout the history of colonialism, certain decisions were made that today impact the ability of those developing countries to adapt. And so I think that it's only right, but I think that in presenting that argument, we have to be very, very careful and also express a willingness by the developing world to assume its fair share of the burden. We shouldn't allow them to argue that the developing world just wants a free world. That's not it at all. And we should be very careful about how the arguments are framed. Most lawyers will tell you that that's how you win or lose a case, and how you frame the issues. And I don't think that the developing countries have yet done a good enough job in framing the issue with respect to adaptation, because it's not just assistance for the developing world. Adaptation measures, that is something for the entire world.
Anja, you have the last word, so to speak.
Thank you, Ambassador von Lierop. I met you in the context of the COP18 of the UNFCCC.
More accurately, I chased you down. I was so impressed with what you said. Let's tell it like it is. She was very, very impressive, and I ran after her to tell her that.
Well, I just wanted to recognize your tremendous leadership in this climate change story. Now, at COP18, and well, previous COPs as well, but at COP18, GWP was really trying to bring the message that water is for adaptation as carbon is for mitigation. And we know that many political leaders have heard the message about carbon, and that we're living in a carbon-constrained world. And I just wanted to ask you, in all fairness, do you see that we can make this argument in time that we are also living in a water-constrained world, and that we need to really look after our precious resources, whether they're in ice or snow or fresh water or salt water, underground or in the atmosphere? We need to look after this precious resource of water. How can we get this message across that this is a crucial part of our understanding of our life here on Earth? And do you see any possibility, in fact, that there could be a dedicated water goal in the post-2015 development agenda? Do you think that that might actually come perhaps before water is recognized in the climate change discussion with its importance to adaptation? Or do you see these two processes perhaps going in harmony, making this argument about the importance of water? Thank you.
I can answer that by truthfully saying that I have great faith in the GWP and your ability to translate that and make that happen. If I didn't believe that it's possible to have a water-dedicated SDG, I don't know that I could sleep at night. Because I don't know how to swim, I must admit. I never learned, I don't know why. I do believe that can happen, and I think you're getting closer and closer. And I think in November, in Warsaw, I think you might see a little bit more a slightly more receptive atmosphere to some of this. At least I'm hoping so. These latest rounds of floods in the last couple of years, the last few months, have really impacted a lot of people's thinking, I believe. I would like to believe. So I would just say keep up the work, keep up the efforts. I'm hoping that even one of the major law firms in the United States might even ask to become a partner in the GWP. That would be the first one that does it. 6 more will follow suit, and that's the way they are. And I have in mind a couple of them that we might try to convince, and you know, I think that could help somewhat. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We have you know, a very, very distinguished law professor here who has those ideas also. So I think we can. There's reason for optimism. Reason for optimism. All of you do a great job, and I'm not just making diplomatic speak, but I can tell you that I'm deeply, deeply moved and impressed, as moved and impressed as I have ever been on any subject, to see the energy that all of you exhibit with respect to water rights. Not only energy, but knowledge.
Ambassador, thanks a lot for your encouraging words, and in a way also the optimism you have conveyed to us, although there are some pessimistic notes. I will take on behalf of the Global Water Partnership with me that you said here is a lot of dynamism in the room. We will use this, be it in New York in the SDG discussion on the 25th of September, be it in Warsaw when the COP19 will take place. Let us see how we can do that, also with your support and all those who support us and have been supporting us all the time. Thank you very, very much, and I have a small token for you. There's a little not water.
Wow. Thank you very much. Let me say one last word, if I may, that I don't know how long I'll be involved in the climate change negotiations. Maybe I'll continue, maybe not. But as long as I am there, if I ever fail to respond to anything that you say or ask of me, please call me on it and say, hey, you promised, you said that you would try to help us, and I will. I can't guarantee results, but I promise you that I will always be a receptive ear to whatever you have to say. Thank you.
With this, we are going to close this session, and you are invited for a short drink.